Hello and welcome to anyone out there who might be watching. My name is David Wright. This is for AVM 401 and I'm speaking specifically for Irene, but anyone else who is out there, welcome and thank you for giving me your time. We're going to take the next 12 to 15 minutes here to discuss something that I think is not being discussed nearly enough in the aviation industry, and that is a necessary push for alternative aviation fuels. For those of us who are already in the industry, we know that currently we utilize avgas and jet fuel. These, of course, have been great, but it's time to move on, and we'll discuss that now. So, a brief history to begin. On December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers departed on the first successful powered flight. They, of course, utilized a gas engine that they designed and built themselves, along with their mechanic, Charles Taylor. Contrary to everybody at the time really kind of using steam engines, because that was the forefront technology. But gas-powered engines proved to rule the day since they had their successful flight, and from that time forward, gas engines will be utilized and developed further. The next great advancement in the aircraft, in fact, comes with World War I, when many world governments entering the war decided that they needed to build up the aircraft they had. The aircraft such as the Wright Flyer were outdated and they were used for primarily scouting missions, but it was time to start utilizing aircraft to their full potential when it comes to war. So of course, great investment went into aircraft, airframes were built up, engines became more reliable, but the fact remained that we were using gas derived from liquid petroleum to power the engines. Internal combustion piston-driven engines continued to be utilized due to their reliability and maintenance-friendly construction. Continuing on, we see that civil aviation in this time after the Great War continued to develop. It became more accessible to the public. People began to romanticize and fall in love with flying, and it's this time that we saw barnstormers and people starting to have their own planes and really get a grip on what this great industry has to offer. But the next big advancement step was World War II. And in fact, World War II was a time of great leaps and bounds for aviation technology. It was actually 3 days before Hitler invaded Poland on September 1st of 1939 that the Heinkel 178 was flown on August 27th, and that was the first turbine-powered aircraft. So it was the first aircraft to utilize jet fuel, and ever since then, its commercial aviation has been all about jet fuel. And that takes us to now. So where are we now? Of course, we see here on the screen some Part 121 operators, maybe some Part 135 operators. On the top left, we have a large commercial jet, followed by a caravan on floats, it looks like, next to it. But one thing that all of these aircraft have in common is that they're all turbine aircraft, and therefore they're all utilizing jet fuel to run. Again, we're talking about this liquid petroleum gas. So that's a big deal, because for the last 100 years, greater than 100 years, we've utilized the same fuel. And although there have been great accomplishments and advancements in technology, it seems to be this one area where we're lacking. We're still tethered to the past. Maybe it's time that we move on from that. What's the big problem with using, crude oil, liquid petroleum, these avgas jet fuels? Well, there's three major issues. First off, availability of fossil fuels. Secondly, being environmental awareness. And thirdly, being government regulation. And we'll get into more of these three as we go along, but I wanted to point out now that government regulation doesn't necessarily mean just from the United States. We're talking in the United States, but I'm speaking world governments. So, moving forward. What needs to be done? Well, the time of the internal combustion engine is coming to an end. Internal combustion simply means that we inject fuel and air into the cylinder, it blows, it powers, and we propel the aircraft. This is also the same for turbine aircraft that have compressors and turbines. They're internal combustion engines as well. But due to factors beyond their control, operators need to start adopting power plants that utilize renewable energy sources. Renewable energy doesn't just mean electricity, although that's the goal, as we'll talk about. It could mean hybrid electric aircraft for now, and even in the foreseeable future, maybe we utilize natural gas, because in reality the availability of natural gas far outweighs the availability of crude oil. So, what if these companies don't want to change? What if I refuse to change? I don't need to change, you need to change. Well, we can look back in the past and see companies that we know well of, who unfortunately, maybe, they are still with us today, but, I'm sorry. There was a very loud noise here. Anyway, Sorry, give me just a second here. Okay, these companies that refuse to change. We talk about companies like Blockbuster, who were very famous in the early 90s and late 90s, even the early 2000s up until their demise in 2013, when they refused to get with streaming services such as Netflix or Hulu. Now there's only one Blockbuster left in Bend, Oregon, and it's more of a novelty than it really is a DVD shop. We also know companies such as Kodak. I'm recording now on a camera. Kodak was the primary supplier of film products, for photography, and they actually invented and came with the technology to utilize digital photography, and they didn't want to roll with it. They stuck to a film-based business model, and this eventually led to their demise. Now, they are still around, although they filed for bankruptcy, but not nearly to the caliber that they once were, and their revenues are much smaller. We can kind of basis this on this quote by Charles Darwin, and it just talks about how it's not necessarily the strongest that survive or the most intelligent, but just the most adaptable. So we know that corporations, businesses are basically people with an infinite lifespan as long as they don't file for bankruptcy or become defunct. And in that case, just like us, just like other organisms, they need to remain saleable. They need to adapt and change to the marketplace in order to remain at the forefront and as real competitors. But moving forward, back to the issues. Let's talk about the availability of these fossil fuels. So, jet fuel and avgas are both derived from blending various liquid petroleum-based products. Liquid petroleum, the common name also is crude oil. Crude oil is the stuff that we hear about in the news. We hear about harvesters such as BP going out to look for this crude oil and then refining it and making it possible for us to use it in our applications, whether it be our cars or our airplanes. But crude oil is a result of organic matter being compressed under intense pressures, heats, temperatures for millions of years beneath the Earth's surface, and then we move in when we harvest this. Now, this isn't a biology lesson. The reason that I bring this up to you is because we need to realize that as organic matter, it's finite. And so we're not always going to have this around. We are going to run out. And in fact, BP themselves have determined that crude oil is finite, go figure, and they have made this index. It's a statistical review of what they estimate how much time they have left to do business in the future, and they're saying that there's only about 50 years left of crude oil, these reserves that are hidden from us. Now, this could change. The crude oil reserves are determined by the technology that we have available to harvest these reserves, so as we develop new technologies and we're able to reach more reserves, they may add to this index. But the fact of the matter is that the population is also increasing. So as the demand goes up, the quantity supplied also has to go up. And unfortunately, the crude oil cannot keep up. It needs millions of years, and we're talking about 50 to 60 years. So the general consensus is, in fact, that we're going to run out of crude oil in about 60 years. And we need to be prepared for that time. One of the next big factors affecting this issue is environmental awareness. We know of movements such as the flight shaming movement, encouraging travelers to consider their carbon output when flying. Greta Thunberg, I don't know how that name triggers you, or it's very divisive, but the fact is that she made the news, and this is something that we need to be aware of. She started this flight shaming movement in Sweden, her home country, and just last year alone, flight shaming dropped commercial air travel by 4%. Now, that's not Europe as a whole, and that's not the United States yet, but it's coming, and it's going to happen. We saw it affect revenues there. It's going to affect revenues here. So companies need to look for a way to be carbon neutral. Of course, in customer service, social values must be reflected in the company's business practices. This means that if they want to continue to be utilized, if they want their products to be purchased, then they need to align their values with the values of the customers that they're serving. Even now, relating to modern times, we talk about stuff such as the Black Lives Matter movement. Again, a very polarizing topic, but we see a lot of commercial endorsements and support for Black Lives Matter from companies who want these people in these protests to continue buying their products. Now, carbon offset, I mentioned that, but what is a carbon offset tax? Well, a carbon offset tax or fee is when an airline will tack on a small fee to your ticket price and say, we'll utilize this and we'll put that money towards a credit, a project that's going to neutralize the carbon of your flight. So we're going to plant a tree somewhere. Now, there's some major offenses that have taken place with this carbon neutral fee. One such fiasco has to do with the Vatican forest that never came to fruition. I don't know if you remember hearing about it, but back in about 2010, the Vatican had invested into this fund to plant a forest, and that's what this carbon neutral tax and fees were doing. And it came to be revealed that this forest just literally never came to fruition. It was never planted, it never existed, but it was something that was being toted by the Vatican. So the root of the matter really is that the offsets don't address the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is that we lack cleaner transportation options. Government regulation, another major factor in this issue. So I highlighted some material here from the International Council on Clean Transportation. They stated in 2020 that 2% of all global emissions are caused from commercial aviation, and that's a total of 12% of all CO2 emissions from the transportation sector. So as a transportation sector as a whole, we need to get better. But 2% of global carbon emissions from aircraft, weighing how much we drive our cars versus how much we fly, it really is staggering how much aviation, how much this industry that we love pollutes the earth, the environment that we're living in. And these commercial aircraft are set on a pace to triple by 2050, which means that our emissions are also going to be triple by that time if we don't improve. Now, the International Council on Clean Transportation, they work with governments worldwide to provide objective-based research and data regarding pollutants. So, like I said earlier, this isn't just in the US, this is world governments. They're relying on data provided by this council, and they're going to use this to affect policies and affect change within their countries. Aviation to this time has gotten away with a lot of polluting, but change is coming. We can remember back in January of this year, a Delta flight, dumped jettisoned fuel over Los Angeles and onto some elementary schools, and teachers are suing now. And people are kind of shifting their attention onto aviation and seeing how much we really pollute and how much we contribute to the carbon problem. Now, like I said, we want to move to electric-based aircraft, maybe hybrid aircraft, and some of the benefits of this are not just fuel burning, and we talk about the limited supply of fuel, but really noise pollution and lead in the air is going to improve as well. So that leads me to my recommendation, and my recommendation is simply to act now. That operators cannot afford to wait, that the certification of a new aircraft takes about 5 to 9 years, and that's straight from the FAA. So we know that it's going to take time to implement this technology. It's not going to happen tonight, it's not going to happen overnight, it's not going to happen tomorrow. But the fact is that the technology is available and it's out there, and they need to start putting R&D into bringing these aircraft up to snuff so that they can then be utilized for commercial transportation purposes, whether it be for passenger or cargo. Operators must invest in these current manufacturers or startups. They need to partner with startups that are out there now who are already building and utilizing electric aircraft. And there's really no shortage of innovators. We talk about Aviation. Aviation is an Israeli-based company, and their aircraft here, the Aviation Alice, is a fully electric aircraft, which is their flagship aircraft. It has room for 9 passengers, 240 knots of cruise at 540 nautical mile range, and not just Aviation, but Rolls-Royce with their RRP 260D engine is providing power for this aircraft. So Rolls-Royce, of course, is a known company who dates back before the wars, so their technology is sound, and they're developing engines to power these aircraft. So the technology is out there. Not just Aviation, but also Washington-based company Magnix. Magnix successfully performed recently the first all-electric flight in an aircraft as large as the Cessna Grand Caravan. It's not the first flight that was all-electric, but for an aircraft of this size and caliber, it's the first time that it was utilized for a fully electric flight. Magnix currently offers 2, and they're producing 2 engines, the Magna 500 and the Magna 250. So the fact of the matter is that these engines are being utilized for a multitude of airframes. They're going to be able to have a lot of different missions that they can fly with these engines, and really they're marketing and making themselves, their technology available not just to maybe a small operator who's operating a Cessna Caravan, but they're trying to market towards a larger market. So, in conclusion, we talked about the issue. We said there's not enough crude oil. We said that environmental awareness is high, so we need to do better. And we talked about government regulations. The need to shift to alternative aviation fuels cannot be more apparent. Just as during the world wars, innovation has kicked off the major growth periods in aviation, and it's time that we have another major growth period. It's time that we take electric aircraft and we make that the future. So the last 100 years that we have of gas, it's been great. I love it. But we need to move forward and have 100 years of electric-powered aircraft. 3 major reasons that these alternative fuels must be utilized, again, we went over this, is fuel exhaustion. It's not just a cause for aircraft accidents anymore. It will happen on a grand scale. We need to make sure that it doesn't impact the industry. Environmental awareness. We have a collective responsibility to affect positive change on the environment. That's not just something that Greta Thunberg said, but now it's something that society is pushing for. So operators, in order to remain salient, need to adopt this as well. They need to realize that they need to be environmentally conscious so that they can market to their customer base. And of course, tighter industry regulation. There's always more regulation, and when it comes to making an excuse, ignorance is not bliss. So really, companies need to be accountable. There's no more excuses. And if you're not happy with electricity, Rolls-Royce has even said that they're developing possibly nuclear reactor technology to be utilized in aircraft. This is something that's already used for submersibles, so it's not far beyond the grand scheme of things. But anyway, here are my references. As you can see, I reference a lot. And I really did my research. I really believe that this is something that needs to be talked about in the open more. It's not a discussion that we're having, and maybe after this COVID pandemic is over, it's a discussion that we can start to have, because 50 years is not a long time to be, finding new crude oil. We need to move past that. We need to be ready for the future, and we need to remain profitable, generating revenue by putting money into research and development and making ourselves in the aviation industry the most equipped and ready to face whatever challenges might come our way. So thanks for sharing your time with me, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks.